All right. Everyone good? Now we are recording. If you guys are watching at home right now, you missed some pretty funny stuff. So, sorry about your luck. You just have to start with Philip the second. No big deal.
Kylie.
Stop! Someone duct tape our mouths?
I didn't think I have some duct tape.
Will you please do that?
You laughing makes her laugh. Kylie, you're laughing makes her laugh.
Dr. Screwdriver, we're gang!
Made it worse.
Good morning, everyone. It's Tuesday.
Oh, Lord.
While they collect themselves, anyone look at the Philip the second.
Oh.
Yeah, King of Spain does all those things you just mentioned. And one of the things we're going to get into is he's really one of our first examples of a European absolute monarch. Now, let's talk monarchy for just a second, because the first fact is that there are different types of monarchs, different types of monarchies. For instance, take England, for instance. The monarch is in a position of weakened power. Even before we get to where Parliament runs everything, the monarch had their power severely limited by a document called Magna Carta. That's what you refer to as a limited monarchy. Henry VIII kind of operated more or less as an absolute monarch, but he's really going to be one of the last ones. You can technically say, I guess, Elizabeth was as well, but even so, their power is going to be fairly limited. Now let's take a look at this little spectrum over here for just a second. Most of you have probably heard of some of these words before. For instance, this first word up here, totalitarian versus libertarian. You guys ever heard either of those two words before? Probably libertarian in terms of a political party, yes. Furthermore, you've probably heard conservative versus liberal, yes. Okay, these are spectrums. On one side you have one extreme, on the other you have a different extreme. Liberal, do you guys know what that word means? Liberal means that you are sort of open to new ideas. Okay, you're willing to change, really do different types of stuff. Conservative means you're more cautious. Okay? So again, they're kind of opposites. Totalitarian is very strong government. Libertarian is weak government. Okay? Not anarchy. That's different. That's no government. We're still talking about government here, just strong versus weak, conservative versus liberal. Does that make sense so far? Okay. Now, the reason it's a spectrum, most of you are probably not extremists in your thinking. You know, you're not all one way all the time, black and white, that sort of thing. Most people fit sort of in the middle somewhere. Or maybe they lean towards one direction, but they have certain other ideas that fit on the other side. Again, this is the idea of a spectrum. Okay? You with me so far? An absolute monarch fits more towards the totalitarian spectrum. Absolute power over everything in their country. Does that kind of make sense? By the way, something that people have talked a lot about lately is our own government, what's going on, things like that. One of the big aspects has to do with the concept of polarization. Polarization is where you have people kind of forced to the outside, to the extremes, because they, for whatever reason, something happens, they can't agree, essentially. So what's going on with the government shutdown is because of polarization. Does that kind of make sense? They can't agree because they're so different in their opinions. All right. What's that? Oh, we do, absolutely. I was just kind of being general. Okay, basically in a nutshell. Every single year, the government has to pass a budget, yes? This is so it can pay its bills. Now, generally speaking, under most of the time, say, normal periods of time, you don't even really debate about it. Just kind of like, this is what it is, okay, fine. We sign it, yes, go ahead, go. However, in extreme situations, it will be debated about and argued about And what we see happening right now is the debate over government spending. Specifically, the Conservative Party, the Republicans, don't want to spend money on a lot of stuff. They want to basically have everybody on their own for everything, kind of basically free to do what they want with their money. Liberals, on the other hand, say we want to kind of have not really social, it's not really a socialist state, but more socialist ideology, if that makes sense. We want basically everybody to more or less pitch in together and everybody's taken care of. Now, please understand, these are very generalized views of these ideologies, but that's kind of what they're talking about. The big sticking point really has to do with ACA, the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. The Republican Party wants to get rid of it. The problem is that to do so, they need to have a majority in the House and the Senate for Congress. They don't have that. So these tactics of basically keeping the government from functioning, they're hoping will make the liberals, who are mostly in charge, look bad. Basically, the Republican Party has said we want America to be as terrible as possible because they'll blame Democrats. And then they'll basically be voted out. We'll have Republicans take control of the government. There you go. The problem, though, is that that's not really working. In truth, most people, according to polls, are blaming Republicans for this. Some are also blaming Democrats, but it comes right down to they get more evidence, so it's not really what they intend. The problem with that is if this was a situation where we can kind of get out of it and look okay, they'd be willing to do that. The problem is they back down, though. They see themselves as basically being weak, and the eyes now lose them votes. So they have to basically get something in return. This is the idea of democracy, by the way. Democracy is all about compromise. Which, when you think about it, means nobody gets what they want. We have to basically fit in the middle here, which has been made harder because people have been forced to the edge because of polarization. Does that kind of make sense? So that's why we're in the government shutdown. Again, very briefly, this is the kind of idea we're looking at. Does that kind of make sense?
It won't be very long, will it?
I don't know. It depends on what can be done. The main issue is, like, for instance, how does this affect us? For most people, probably not very much. Other people, though, are losing their jobs. It's on a furlough, which basically means that you're given a non-paid forced vacation. So that sucks. It's really hard to work. In addition, there's certain benefits paid to something like veterans, stipends, things like they won't be getting until they can basically sort this out. The thing that's kind of ironic, though, is ACA is basically already funded. It was in its whenever it was put into law, Obamacare basically was said, hey, you have to fund this amount. So basically, the government shutdown doesn't affect it at all. So, it's kind of one of these things that it is not really working the way people intended it to, if that makes any sense. So basically what it comes down to is politics. It's a way for folks to try to get what they want, but we end up suffering because of it, and that actually puts pressure on them to find a solution. Because if we get mad enough, guess what? We're not going to vote them in again. If that makes any sense. So it's a gamble, nothing else. Fair enough? Good? Cool. Good questions. Yeah, so moving on. The first thing with Philip II, okay, is that he's a deeply religious guy. Can somebody tell me about this battle right here, Battle of Lepanto? Do you know what that was all about? That's okay if you don't, I can tell you. Does anyone know who it was against? Obviously, Spain was on one side. Who was the other side? Okay, yeah. It wasn't Portugal. It was the Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire. Basically, this is part of spreading Catholicism, but also combating the enemy of Catholicism. Philip was a very religious man. Spain was very deeply Catholic. You might remember Henry VIII had this title, Defender of the Faith. You remember that? Well, he loses it once his country goes Protestant. Guess who gets it? Spain. So this is kind of part of that. The Pope is calling for this great crusade against the Ottomans, and Lepanto is one of these places. It's a naval engagement where the Spanish, and I believe it was also the Portuguese fleet, I could be wrong on that though, they end up fighting against the Ottomans and winning. The problem though is it doesn't really give them much territory. So it's very costly, but it doesn't really get them anything except for status within the Christian world. In addition, he's fighting wars against other Europeans. The best example of that is the biggest Protestant, most powerful Protestant nation in Europe at this time. That would be England. Which, by the way, who was the ruler of England at this point? Does anyone know? It was a queen. Queen Elizabeth I. So she is going to fight against Spain. Now here's the thing. What causes this war? Well, again, for one thing, England is Protestant, they're Catholic. Secondly, the English control some former Spanish territory that they'd like to get back, specifically the Netherlands. Thirdly, the English end up basically fighting this privateering war. You might remember reading about Sir Francis Drake, yes? He was the guy who did all this crazy stuff, including sacking a Spanish treasure port, and basically taking this huge sum of money, something like 18 million, and takes it all the way around the world, circumnavigating the globe, and takes it back to England, where he is then knighted. They end up wanting to punish him for this, the Spanish do, I mean to say, and they basically give Elizabeth an ultimatum: either punish him and send him to us and return what you stole, or else war. And she basically knights him in just kind of a big Spain, and thus begins the war. Problem though, Spain has a really good army. England has a really good navy. England is an island. So how are we going to attack? Simple. We build ourselves a navy. Remember all this Spanish gold that's coming from the Americas? We're going to spend that money and make a big old fleet. However, there's a problem with this fleet. For one thing, it's brand new ships. Okay? Secondly, look at the supplies they're taking. Okay? One of the most interesting things has to do with how we're going to store our food. Guys, how do you store our food on a ship? You know, our salt pork, our beer, our wine, our water. What's it all being stored in? Barrels, yeah. And here's the thing is, what type of wood do you want to make barrels out of? Old or new? You want old.
Oh.
You know why? What is inside new wood until you dry it out? Sap. Imagine drinking sap. Yeah. It makes the food go bad. Spoils things. So they're just pumping out the barrels, trying to get enough of them, and they end up using new wood and ends up biting them in the backside. In addition, one of the things you have to realize about ships is that they're made of wood. Does wood and water mix? Is that good together? No, of course not. You have to waterproof them, which means using things like pitch, which is flammable. You also have to use tar, which is flammable. All these types of things on wood, which is flammable. You see where I'm going with this. The English use what are called fire ships. Basically, you take an old ship, load it with stuff that burns, send it on its merry way. Set sail, jump overboard, goodbye. This is made especially bad because of the defensible position that the Spanish are taking. Case in point, this is the formation the Spanish Armada is going into. Look how closely bunched up they are. Imagine a fire ship touching off right here. Boom, everything burns. Fire at sea, serious business. So this begs the question, why would they take this crescent shape? Because it's defensible. The strongest and weakest, well, technically not the weakest is the rudder, but the second weakest is the side of a ship. Also the strongest, that's where all your cannons are, yes? So if you're going directly at a ship that has a side point at you, it makes it really hard for it to shoot all of its guns at you. So how do you shore up this weakness? You have them side by side like this. Whenever you fight, you form a different line where it's nose to tail, okay, stem to stern. That's a battle line. This is for defense. So they take advantage of that by using the fire ships, and in addition, there's a series of bad weather which at first benefits the Spanish, but then later hinders them, and in the long run, the English are victorious. They defeat the Spanish, and this is a humiliating defeat. In addition, it's going to cost a significant amount of money, and that's going to help push the Spanish Empire down. Despite this, Philip II is in command of the glory age of Spain. You have famous painters and artists, writers that are contributing to the culture and the prestige that is the Spanish crown. In addition, we have to understand about Philip, he's a distrustful guy in general. He doesn't trust his bureaucrats to run things thoroughly. Basically, doesn't like other people doing work under him. He wants to be in command of everything. So basically, he becomes the first absolute monarch that we can think of because he's distrustful. And in the end, this is going to end up being bad as well. Despite Spain's great glories and things like that, it's eventually going to decline, and the reasons are thusly. First, whenever you have one guy who's in charge of everything, right? The state really relies on him. You know, that guy can't have a bad day. He can't call in sick. He's got to do stuff constantly. What happens when he dies, though? Who's going to take over? Well, his successor. But then the state is only as good as successor, and his successors were not nearly as talented as he was. So the system ends up kind of collapsing on itself. Next, Spain's overseas wars, like we saw with Lepanto against the Ottomans, what we saw with the English, are depleting it of a significant number of its resources. These wars are going to bankrupt the country 3 different times. We think we have economic problems in this country. Thirdly, Spain's reliance on American treasure is so great that their economy basically changes to rely upon it. Whenever that starts to dry up, when the colonies stop producing, and later, when they outright rebel and they lose those colonies, they have nothing. Their economy isn't set up to do that anymore. It's just, they take a while to adapt. Next, Spain really heavily taxes the middle class. Now, specifically, this is in the Netherlands. Now, this, of course, is a conquered people, so they already aren't too happy with the crown, but they can deal with it because guess what? The middle class is the crown's best supporters. Think about it this way. Middle class businessmen, what do they have to gain from a strong king? What benefits them as merchants? If you have a strong king, what usually don't you have? War and chaos, for one thing. Specifically, they are going to patrol the trade routes because they want their tax money, and that benefits them. They don't have to worry about being robbed, so this benefits them. However, by taxing them too heavily, he makes an enemy of friends, and this ends up resulting in this collapse. Next, as we've already established, Spain was very Catholic, which unfortunately for them also meant they were very anti-everyone else. They kicked the Jews out of Spain. They already kicked the Muslims out years before. So basically, if you're not Catholic, you're not allowed in the country. Now, what this means, a significant number of Jews, especially, were what we would consider skilled laborers. They were pushed into positions by their parents, in a lot of cases, who wanted them to succeed, into really lucrative jobs. So by getting rid of them, we're losing these valuable human resources, and worst of all, we're giving them to our enemies. Because England and places like that are religiously tolerant are going to snap them up and give them sanctuary, and this ends up creating a big problem for us. Finally, the large amount of gold and silver we were talking about. What is gold and silver basically to these people? It is literally what? It's literally money, yes. What's last name, sorry? And this is going to mean that we have more and more and more of this in circulation. But what happens when you have too much money in circulation? It loses its value, otherwise known as inflation. So this is going to be another big problem for Spain, as its primary source of wealth is going to basically start depleting itself. All right, can somebody tell me, identify, what does the term divine right mean? Absolutely. So this is going to be one of the reasons we have the development of absolute monarchies in the first place. Basically, who was the number one power here before the Protestant Reformation? It's the Catholic Church. With the Reformation fully in play, they have lost a significant amount of power. Power that is going to be fulfilled, by the way, by the monarchs. They're going to take this advantage and establish themselves as absolute monarchs. And they take this idea that, God has put me in this position, and they're going to use that to justify their reigns. Some more successfully than others, I might add. All right, while you guys are finishing this up, for tomorrow, you're going to have 2 days basically to read the next section. It's slightly larger than this one. Tomorrow, though, we, of course, as you know, have 2 o'clock dismissal for the faculty meeting. So what we're going to do tomorrow is actually we're going to watch a documentary series that is on architecture, specifically that which you see in France. And the thing that we're really going to pay a lot of attention to is the Palace of Versailles, which is arguably the most impressive building in the world. Not to mention some dude's house, or at least used to be. The amount of work that goes into it is mind-boggling. It's one of the most beautiful places on earth. It's also one of the most gaudy. I mean, oh my gaudy. It's ridiculous. You'll see what I mean, though, just in terms of the decorations and things of that. Louis had the idea that basically the best way of showing off wealth is by showing it off as much as possible. He spared no expense. Having like statues made of solid gold, that sort of thing. Because, big shiny gold statue, that's oh my goodness. It's ridiculous. Sorry. Anyhow, the next section we're going to look at here is actually about artists. One of these guys you've already seen. By the way, you'll be pleased to know that we're past the vast majority of writing for this particular section. So, yay! We good to go?
Yeah.
Fabuloso. So the one I mentioned before that you've seen before is the guy at the bottom. Don Quixote de la Mancha, written by Miguel de Cervantes. Arguably the first European novel, and one of the most important books in history. Again, you know the story behind it, so we're not going to go into too much detail. The other two guys, though, El Greco and Velázquez, are 2 Spanish painters. Now, can anyone tell me what was significant about the works of El Greco? Like, what can we tell from looking at his works about color and things like that? It's describable. Yes, it did. Subject matter such as saints, martyrs, things like that. The colors were often very starkly contrasting. You'll notice with the painting I'm about to show you that the darks are very dark, the lights are very light. Okay, this was a stylistic approach. Also, limbs were often drawn much longer than reality, which again is interesting because when we look at like the Renaissance, we see more and more like folks like Michelangelo who want to make it look real. He wasn't really terribly interested in that, partially because of where he came from. He was Greek, specifically influenced by the art of the Byzantine Empire, or Byzantium. So he kind of had this almost medieval approach to it, which is kind of interesting because we're kind of just going backwards. Despite that, he was a very talented painter. And what's interesting also is, as I said, he was Greek. And yeah, I don't even remember what his name was in Greek. Here's Greek name. But basically, the people refer to him just simply as the Greek, or El Greco. Velázquez, on the other hand, he had a different subject matter approach also. His coloring tended to be much more vibrant, although at the same token, not as starkly contrasting. In addition, the figures he often showed were kind of everyday people in a lot of ways, doing everyday things. It wasn't all that lofty in his portrayal, more sort of just kind of things that you would see, and that's pretty self-explanatory. But this right here, you might notice, again, the color scheme. So this is who, do you think? Again, look at the darks, look at the white. So that would mean he is El Greco. Yes. It's the burial of a nobleman. There's right here. And the face is, again, very, very pale. Interesting. On the other hand, this by Velázquez, the Treaty of Breda, which was a battle fought in the Netherlands. And again, kind of a little bit more realistic. The color scheme is more matchy-matchy. The other thing that I think is interesting about this particular painting, though, is it shows very well the Spanish tercio, which was the military formations that they developed. Basically, it was undefeated for nearly 100 years. Tercio uses the pipes, which you can see in the back, muskets, which you can kind of see here, here, and here, and then over here you got the swordsmen. So basically you have musketeers that would be firing, and they were protected by the pikes for horses, and then if other pikes or swordsmen approached, the swordsman could defend the pikes. So basically, it's kind of everyone relies on each other and forms the three-parter. It's tercio. And then finally, the rise of absolutism. You're going to have absolute governments developing throughout Europe. The main reason being the weakening of the church due to the Protestant Reformation, and then also the middle class support of a strong king because they are going to benefit from it. You'll notice on page 160 of your textbook that it has some graphs portraying this, and again, I would look at that at some point if I were you. But otherwise, this is it for today, guys. So, in short, we're going to look at some other absolute monarchs throughout Europe and the ways that their kingdoms are going to affect things. But what you're also going to have from this time period is crazy music coming from next door. Dun dun dun! So epic and sounding. But you're going to have a counterpoint of debate and of a counter view of government, specifically with the involvement of the Enlightenment, with this emphasis on personal rights and natural freedoms, things that everyone is intrinsically born with, as opposed to those that are given to us by a monarch. So this is going to be a retaliation to this form of government, which in and of itself is a retaliation. So again, history is thematic, guys. The thing that makes it hardest to understand is the fact that it all builds on itself. You know, it's kind of like this happened because this happened, this happened because this happened, backwards, 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 backwards. I have debated in the past of doing history that way, starting modern and going backwards. But, well, I don't know, because in one way it'd be easier because it's like, all right, what you have right now, why are we looking this way? Because of this. Okay, why is that way? Because of that. Just keep moving backwards. I don't know. It's a thought. All right, guys, that's it for today. And go right ahead. And shutting you down.